Welcome to another session on Kabbalah, the Dragon, the Priest, and Governments, Part 4. The last time when we talked about the cycle of assessment and the role of the dragon, we saw how if a person is very biased and only thinking about their own perspective, they are actually following the path of the dragon. But when we are able to look beyond ourselves and to take into consideration more perspectives than our own, we're following the path of the priest and the way of justice. Now, when we think about justice, we think about maybe the legal system. And actually, the Levitical priests were more like our modern day congressmen or justices who sit on the bench and judge court trials than they are to what we think of as priests today. In fact, the real illusion is that we don't see how religion of the Bible is the same as government. Well, let's take a look at that by showing the United States government in the Kabbalah model. Now, our government is made of three different branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And the easiest branch to plot to the Kabbalah would be the legislative branch, because it fits squarely on the circle of Yesod, mainly because the legislative branch deals with creation of law. Next to that would be the judicial branch, which looks at all the laws that the legislative branch creates and decides whether or not they're constitutional. They're not really creating anything new, so they're only giving rulings on the laws that are created, and so they belong in the assessment part of the Kabbalah. The executive branch as well fits in the assessment side because they look out at what the world is doing and what businesses are doing inside of the United States, and they create policies and procedures based on what they assess. And despite what department we're looking at, whether it's the CIA, the FBI, or the Food and Drug Administration, they all follow in that same pattern of looking at what others are doing, assessing what they're doing, and creating policy or law. That even goes as far as the Department of Education. But when we want to talk about the creative side of the Kabbalah, we have to go and turn to industry. Industry fulfills the creative side of the Kabbalah, and almost none of the government does, unless you talk about NASA. NASA actually does create different things like Tang and rocket ships and different mechanisms. The Hubble telescope is another thing that came out of NASA. So, but very little of our government actually fits into the creative side of Kabbalah. But before we get too down on our government and the way that it's set up, let's take a look at the way things were before modern democracy. And in that age, we had kings. And kings really weren't troubled with new technology and making lives better for their people. They were mainly about controlling the people and keeping the image of divine right of rulers in place. And so there really wasn't a creative cycle. There was just legislative bodies to control the behavior of the people. When we get down to the creation of our government, even though the founding fathers were very wise, what they had to go on, the past structure of governments, was all based upon assessment or control of the people. And yet they were influenced by people like Montesquieu and Voltaire, French philosophers who talked about the rights of men. And so even though our government structure is based upon the assessment cycle, as it has been throughout history, from emperors and pharaohs and rajas, they all are interested in control. they still left a door open for people to become creative, to follow what's called an inner decisiveness of what they were going to be. And this opened the doorway for the Declaration of Independence and the rights of men. And that led to industry growing separate from government and fulfilling the creative cycle. Now, when we talk about Kabbalah and we talk about the creative cycle, we're actually talking about Kether, which is the potential of all ideas. So industry is using their minds to create or take out of the universe these ideas, distilling them one at a time, comparing them to what's already been created, and then placing them within the kingdom. But with the cycle of assessment, the government is mainly interested in looking at what is out there in the world. And that includes these new creations by industry, assessing what they are and how they affect people, whether figuring out the pros and cons, and then creating law, which is then enforced in Malkuth. However, if we're really going to look at this cycle of creation and assessment, or the full cycle of Kabbalah, the movement of our government towards that in this modern era has been really organic. It wasn't planned to be that way. And so now we're starting to notice that there are some shortcomings, some shortfalls. And people are complaining about the government, that it is not doing its job well enough. And maybe we're expecting it to be more cohesive. And yet that is exactly what's happening. It's trying to become more cohesive. And in doing so, it will become Zion, the victorious woman, which is what the entire Kabbalah represents. If you want to know more about Jewish and Christian symbology, prophecies, hidden meanings in the Bible, and symbolism, please join us on Facebook under Jewish and Christian Symbology.